us today. I'm Shenjan Liao, head of the School of Chinese Studies at China Institute and the moderator of today's program, Music Chat on Chinese Orchestra at the Crossroads of the West and China. 茶话中国音乐，在中西文化的交汇点. Please first allow me to turn to Mr. James Heimowitz, President of China Institute, for opening remarks. James, please turn on your camera.
Thank you, Shenjan, and a big welcome to all of you. It's really a delight and an honor to be able to introduce this program. For those of you that don't know China Institute, we were founded in 1926. So for about 96 years, we've been helping Americans to understand China better through art, through education, through culture, through business programs. And I can't think of anything more integral to the core of understanding at a human level than music. And for us to be able to collaborate with Bard College's Conservatory and also with the Central Conservatory in China, to me is so truly special. I think we're in for a treat tonight, and I want to express my gratitude and my thanks to everybody for pulling this program together, to Liao Shenjan, who you just heard speak, who takes on so much in addition to being the head of our school, driving all of our education programs. And of course, to Cai Jindong, whose fearless leadership gets us to the beautiful things we're about to experience this evening. So I just wanted to give a big welcome, and I look forward, just like the rest of you, to listening and experiencing tonight's program. I also just want to say, before I turn it back over to Shenjan, this is a really stressful time. This is a stressful time, not only because of COVID, but also because of the overall relationship between China and the US. And I'm hopeful that in our own way, as we connect people, whether it's through music tonight or through art or through culture or through business, that we're helping to create a bridge towards understanding. And I hope that you will support everyone and support our organization. We just sent out a link that's just flashed up on me that'll give you a connection to be able to help sign up. So if you're not already a member of China Institute, I encourage you to click the link and to find out so that you can join us and support us for more programs like the one you're about to experience tonight. So back to you, Shenjan, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity to say a few words.
Thanks, James. I'm super excited about today's program. As James mentioned, the music is really what unites people, especially tonight. Today's program joined by two distinguished speakers. We will start the program with a presentation on the topic of Chinese orchestra by Mr. JunYi Chow, JunYi. Following the presentation, I will invite Professor Jindong Cai, Cai Jindong 教授, whom I will introduce more later, to join a moderated discussion before we open the Q&A to the audience. As a reminder for the audience, you can type your questions or comments using Q&A in either English or Chinese. You may do so during the program, but please be reminded to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will address those questions after discussions with our speakers. I also want to mention today's program is special as well. We partner with DCTA project, developing Chinese language teachers at New York University to welcome Chinese language teachers from across US and the world as part of their professional development training. Professor Frank Tang and Robin Harvey, I know you are among the many participants today. Thank you so much for partnering with us. I do believe our teachers are critically important as we educate students for the future. As a follow-up, a discussion on pedagogy for teachers will be held on November 13th. A registration link will be posted in the chat box. Please do check at the end of today's program. So now please allow me to introduce our first speaker, JunYi Chow. JunYi, can you please turn on your camera and unmute yourself?
Here we go.
Hi,
Hello,
JunYi.
Sun.
Hi. So JunYi is a Malaysia-born, New York-based composer, multi-instrumentalist, and improviser. Currently, he is the composer in residence of the Teng Company in Singapore and the Vivo Experimental Orchestra in Malaysia. He was previously the conductor of Chinese Music Ensemble of New York from 2018 to 2019. Besides working extensively in the United States, Asia, and Europe, JunYi is also an active researcher of the music for Chinese orchestra. He co-authored the Teng Guide to the Chinese Orchestra, a one-stop guide for composers, scholars, and enthusiasts alike, which we're going to talk about later during the program. So first, I will turn to JunYi while we are opening the PowerPoint for the presentation part. So JunYi, now it's yours.
Thank you, Sun.
And can we get the PowerPoint up?
All right, thank you, Ziren. Welcome back, everyone. And what you just seen just now is the piece called Yao Zhu Wu Qu, Dance of the Yao People. And interestingly, the first version where you see the Western Symphony Orchestra was composed back in 1952 by Mr. Liu Tiesan and Mao Ran. Later on in 1962, where Mr. Peng Xiuwen composed the Chinese orchestra version. So as you can see, there are some similarities and also difference between both orchestra, which I'm going to go through with you after this. Ziren, can you please go to the next slide, please? Right, so here we go. This is like most of us know about the chart of the Western Symphony Orchestra, where you have the string sections at the front, violin, viola, cello, double bass, and at the back, you have the woodwind and the brass, as well as the percussion instruments. Please note that one thing is like the orchestra is in a fan shape, and the conductor is at the front, at the center, around the circle, in front of the orchestra. Okay, next we have the next chart. See some similarities or not? This is a chart provided by Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra. You can see at the front you have the bow string sections, as if like the Western string sections. At the back, you also have the string wind sections. And in the middle of everything, you have something, you have a one particular unique group is the pluck string sections, as well as the percussions group around them. So, and one more thing is also, there's also one conductor of this modern Chinese orchestra. So, Ziran, can we go to the next slide? Yes. So in Western Symphony Orchestra, we actually have 4 groups, as I mentioned just now: strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion. And in Chinese orchestra, Ziran, can you go back to the previous? Thank you. We normally call them in 4 groups, which is cui, la, tan, da. Cui is the wind group, la is the bow string sections, tan is the pluck string section, and finally the da is the percussion group. Today, due to the time limit, we might not go through every instrument in the Chinese orchestra, but we still will show some videos, just let you have an idea what the instrument is and just have an idea how it sounds like. So next, please. Yes, here we go. The first one, we have the wind group. In wind group, normally we have 3 kinds of instruments. The first one is the dizi, which is the bamboo flute. Second, the sheng, mouth reed organ, as well as the suona, which is a double reed pipe, or some might call it like double reed trumpet, because they have kind of like similar appearance or look. Then next, please, Ziran. Yes. Now we are going to play you one excerpt where it features the wind percussion ensemble. We call it the cui da yue. In here, please note that also from left to right, the left is the dizi, in the middle is the sheng, at the right is the suona, and at the back is the percussion instruments. The piece is called Jingqing, Golden Chime, composed by Xie Peng. Next slide, please. Oops, okay, here we go. So this picture here, they are all dizis with different size, different keys from small to big. And you can see at the bottom, there's a flute over there. Please note that one thing is that all these dizis, different size, is not purposely designed in a musical method, reason to expand the range or no. Back in the time, some dizi, like the smaller one, we call it the bang di, is normally played in the northern China. And another one with a longer, we call it xu di, is normally played at the kun, is the common instruments for the kunqu, which is actually a regional theater opera in Jiangsu district. So next, please. We have a picture here. It's like how you play the dizi, and also different size of the dizi from xiao di, bang di, qu di, and da di. Just you have an idea how it looks like, how people play the dizi. Next, please. Now we have the suona. So suona, a double reed part, it also has different keys as well as different size. So next slide, please. Just an idea for you how it looks like to play the suona. It's like from small to bigger size. Next slide, please. So this one here is an interesting one. At the right side, you see 3 suonas, which is the traditional suona. The body itself is like the bamboo. We have the bell as the same, and also the double reed on the top. But at the left, we have a clarinet over there. Why so? Because in the middle, there are 4 kinds of the suona, which is reinvented based on the traditional suona. They add the keys, which is used on the clarinet, the key system, to expand the intonation as well as the range. Traditional suona, normally they can play diatonic scale, But now with the key suona and from different range, high to low, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, they can play also bigger range as well as chromatic skills. So next slide, please. So the sheng, mouth reed organ, this is also just like just now. At the right side, we have a traditional sheng, and then a reinvented key sheng, chromatic sheng, we also call it the chromatic sheng at the left side. Also from high to low register, soprano, alto, and bass sheng. Both in the middle, it's actually both alto sheng, but they are two kind of design as well as manufacture. So if you see the one in the middle, it's like you're hugging the sheng. So they play the sheng as if they need, and the other one, they hug the sheng, and then they need to press the key on the other side. While the one at the left second is kind of like a keypad. So you press the button in front of you, you blow the air, and you have the sound. Next, please. So here we have the photo. Just have an idea how the player play and position the sheng. And just now you can see the bao sheng is like hugging the sheng. Next one. So and then you see the one of the left is the pai sheng. Also alto sheng also. You can see it's like pressing the button and blowing the air and play. Bass sheng is also normally in a bao sheng, just like hugging this one, what you look over here. Next slide, please. And this one is particularly the traditional sheng, and it's lighter, as you can see, it's smaller, and you can basically just hold it on your hand to play it. And now we are going to play you two particular tracks of different sheng, traditional sheng and the gaoying sheng. Next slide, please. So traditional sheng normally they have different numbers of reeds, but this one is a common one, which is a 21 reeds, and non-chromatic, which is very important because it's like the one that you can see just now, the reinvented version is like chromatic skills. It can play chromatic and also has a bigger range as well. And one more thing very important about this sheng is that the way you play is through the open hole. There is a hole of the pipe, you press the hole and you blow the air and you play. But the other one is like key, you need to press the button to play it. So Ziren, can we play the video of this one? Right, next slide, please. So this is the gaoying sheng, which is the reinvented version. As you can see, it's like the number of the reeds is more, 36, and it can play 3 octaves, what we on the piano, and it's the key operator parts, like you press the key to play it. So one thing very important about the difference between key operator parts or the open holes is that open holes, inhale, exhale, both inhale and exhale, you can play it. But this particular one, you can only just exhale to play it. So imagine this particular new modern particular gaoying sheng, it sounds more like the accordion. Yeah, please play. Have a play. Great, that's it for the wind group for now. There is also another instrument called guanzi, but we are not going through that one today, but next time maybe perhaps. Now we are going to the next group, which is the bow group, strings group. Next slide, please. So huqing, two-string fiddles. In orchestra, normally we would use, these are the common huqing that we would use in the Chinese orchestra, which are the erhu, zhonghu, gaohu, and gehu. Gehu actually is not a two-string. I will explain later in this presentation. I'm sorry about that. So erhu is the most common one that normally we see these days in modern time. Zhonghu has a lower sound. Gaohu has a higher sound than erhu. And normally gaohu is played in the Cantonese music. One thing to note that they're in the picture previous. So Siren, can we go back to the previous picture? In here, there are also a few other huqing that we can see is, for example, a jinghu at the right side and banhu at the left side, as well as another is the have a long neck. That one is called the zuihu. These particular huqing are not common for Chinese orchestra because they are played normally in some special setting or particular genre. For example, jinghu is normally played in the Jingju, which is the Peking opera, and also banhu is normally more common to play at the regional theater opera. Another thing is that their sound is too distinctive to blend with the other huqing, which next slide, which normally we see over here is like erhu, zhonghu, gaohu. So so normally right now when we learn to compose music, we compose for the Chinese orchestra. These are the common huqing which would include in the Chinese orchestra. Next slide, please. So I know many might have already heard erhu, but let's have a listen right now. So gehu right now. Gehu is one particular instrument that is created back in 1950s purposely as the bass instrument for the Chinese orchestra. However, it's not really well conceived throughout the time. As you can see over here in this picture, you can see at the side the membrane. There is a huge python skin membrane. Please note that most of the huqing, the membrane of the sound box, they still use the python skin this day, but particularly for gehu, it's very big. It's like even like bigger than my face, like a pizza size. So since the huge python skin is very rare, there's not many gehu back in the time, even this day. And one more problem is that overall the sound quality is not as stable because the membrane skin got some issue easily with the weather. So these days in modern Chinese orchestra, many orchestra replace gehu with cello and double bass. However, next slide, we have this, which is the Huanbao gehu, an eco gehu here, where it replaced the python skin with a renewable PET membrane. I don't know how to pronounce this PET, but it's kind of like a plastic membrane. Next slide, please. Yes, this particular eco huqing series, Huanbao huqing, is actually developed by Mr. Ruan Sichun from Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra. And you can see it at the picture right now. It's like the gray color. That's the plastic membrane, not necessarily plastic, but I mean, that's the PET membrane that they use. And difference for different huqing, gaohu, erhu, zhonghu, gehu, and even the bass gehu. This particular invention is very important, like as I mentioned just now, due to the weather situation. And actually, if you, just for your knowledge, some erhu player, they actually have two different erhus in case they need to perform in different places. For example, in Beijing, the weather is more dry. And while in Shanghai, it's more humid. So they actually prepare two different kinds of erhus to perform separately. And second, there are some countries actually prohibit people to bring python skin to enter the country. So this particular invention actually solved that problem and makes the international touring more available in the time. And finally, there's one also very important, which is the sound quality. Like the Western Symphony Orchestra, where at the string section, it's all one instruments that is almost the same design, violin, viola, cello, bass. So this particular member actually would achieve as much as like it couldn't achieve 100%, but it would bring more homogeneous and more uniform sound quality to the bow string section as a whole for the Chinese orchestra. So next, please. Pluck string sections. One of my favorite sections, because this particular section is the unique one when you are listening to Chinese orchestra, where you have the pipa, yangqing, ruan, and guzheng. Next slide. Pipa, one of the most expressive instrument in Chinese orchestra, and can be the one of the oldest instruments throughout the Chinese music history. Why is it so like one of the most expressive? Why would I say that? Is that the way pipa play is like they use their finger. And back in time, of course, they use their fingernails to play, but these days they use the artificial nail to play. But each of the way they play, there is a technique. It's different, and each of them creates different sound. As you can see in this presentation here, each of this picture is a way to play pipa. And as a composer, it's very important for me to understand how to play each of sound and understand how to write for each sound. So that's why it's really like, oh my God, I need to spend time to understand each of them and then put them into my music. So let's have a listen to pipa. Next one. So not all Chinese instruments that in the Chinese orchestra are original from China. Like this one over here, the hammer dulcimer, many just like are the dulcimer around the whole world. Most are originated from Central Asia and came to China through the Silk Road. So let's have a listen. Right. All right, Moonlut. This is a one very interesting instrument because this is actually a modern instrument. Unlike pipa or yangqing and guzheng, is like passed down from time to time. This particular instrument is reinvented back in 1950s in order to fulfill the needs of the lower range in the Prague string sections. And it actually lost track in the history since 13th dynasty in China, which is around the Song dynasty. So right now, let's go to the next video. So this particular video, we are going to listen a duet of both Moonlute and Guzheng. And this particular video is a twins from Singapore, Tan Su Min and Tan Su Hui, and they are going to play a excerpt of this particular excerpt is Jiu Kuang, the drunkard, which arranged by themselves. And when you listen to Moonlute, you can actually imagine them a little bit like guitar, but just enjoy right now. Have a listen. Right now, we are at the final group, which is the percussion group. Just like Western Symphony Orchestra, we have a lot of percussion instruments over here and different size, like the cymbals, gongs. Next slide, please. Drums, clapper, claves, wood blocks. Unfortunately, we can't really play each of them for you. What we are going to do right now is we are going to play you an excerpt. Next slide. From Feng Shou Luo Gu, Drums in Celebration of a Bumper Harvest, composed by Peng Xiwen and Cai Huiquan. This particular piece right now, you will see a particular section where it features only the percussion group, which is a drum solo, as well as some other cymbals and the gongs accompany alongside. Please. Right. So thank you again. That's all for the demonstration for the instruments. Right now, I would like to invite Sun Zhan and Professor Cai Dingdong back to the discussion, where we will chat a little bit about the history of the Chinese orchestra. Please welcome.
Thank you, JunYi, so much for the great presentation. Very informative, especially, well, to me, I'm really new to a lot of the knowledge you share. Thank you so much. And also, we just posted a link to a YouTube recording from a previous music chat program on pipa. As JunYi just mentioned, pipa, the instrument, we did our first music chat on pipa. So there's a lot of in-depth discussion and sharing of pipa's history and current state with Miss Zhou Yi, who's our pipa instructor and from the Music at China Institute program. So now I would invite Professor Jindong Cai to the program for the second part of the discussion. Jindong, could you turn on your camera? Hi, Jindong. And you, yes. So Professor Cai perhaps may not require introduction, especially for Friends of China Institute and our Music at China Institute program. But I just want to share briefly with a distinguished career conducting top orchestra in China and across North America. Professor Cai is currently the director of the US-China Music Institute and a professor of music and arts at Bard College, which we, China Institute, is honored to partner with, as James mentioned, on our Music at China Institute program. And Professor Cai is also the artistic director of our program. And just also very briefly, through our collaboration, we offer pipa and guqin classes at China Institute, and also produce programs like today's music chat to bring an understanding and appreciation of Chinese music to the world. And after JunYi's presentation of Chinese orchestra, I just feel, well, I'm sure Jindong, you would agree, we have to add more music instrument to our class roosters.
Yes, it's a very wonderful presentation of the JunYi did to really present all those instruments. You can see the original form, a contemporary form, and even the future form, like this environmentally corrected instruments.
Indeed. I want to start the discussion first with Professor Cai. Actually, go even prior to Chinese orchestra. As we learned today, especially there is a connection, as JunYi's presentation showed at the beginning, of Western symphonic orchestra and the Chinese orchestra that's coming in more or less close to the modern time. But my question is, what is the tradition of Chinese music ensembles in China's history? I will first start the question with Professor Cai, and JunYi, if you have anything, please add as well.
Well, it's so nice to be here talking about the Chinese music. And as JunYi presented, I think you can see a very clear picture. And there's a Western Symphony Orchestra, the Chinese Orchestra. And I would say the modern Chinese orchestra, it's pretty much created after Western Symphony Orchestra's model. But it doesn't mean China had never had ensemble. If you go back to even warrior time, that's 2,500 years ago, there's all different kind of instruments. And like in Hubei province in 1978, and there's a big, we call Bianzhong set unearthed. And that, the huge set of Bianzhong, I don't have to, and we don't have time to show the picture, but I think many of you probably saw that. And that's from 2,500 years ago. Bianzhong, there's a whole set of Bianzhong, including 65 bells. And the biggest bell is about 1 meter high. And then there's all different kind of sizes, and they can play all different kind of tunes, even the half step or full step, or also so on. And but at the same time, in the same tone, and unearthed some other instrument like sheng or other. So you can see back to the ancient time, China already have their own ensemble. Yes, but this ensemble mostly for a ritual, for ceremony, right? That and Confucius time, or even before Confucius. And during that ancient China time, actually music developed quite broadly. You can see from the Bianzhong set, and also you can see not only the instrument itself, but also the ceremony, and you can see how important the music is to the rulers. So that is the ancient time. Of course, and then after that, there are different dynasties, different generations, and Chinese instrument disappeared, invited, and this pair are invited, or some other situation. We invite some other instrument from different culture, like from Persia or from north, from Mongolia, or from all different places. Those instruments came to China, then changed into Chinese. Now we use it quite often. Like JunYi mentioned the sona, for example. Sona is from Persia, and a part of the pipa also come from Persia. So all those are like that. So, but I would say today we're talking about the modern Chinese orchestra. It's really after Western Symphony Orchestra's model, and I would say people have been trying to create this Chinese orchestra, but the real definition of the beginning of this orchestra it's not earlier than 1950s, and I would say mostly it's like for political reason, and after 1949 when the new China created, right, and so we have a symphony orchestra still stay. So we have the Central Philharmonic, we have Shanghai Symphony, and then when the leaders invite foreign leaders come to China, we show them some entertainment, so them to perform the symphony orchestra. But at the same time, there's a couple of times the Chinese leaders like Premier Zhou Enlai to say, we need to have our own orchestra. And so, and if I go to overseas to visit other countries, I can tell them how, deeply our culture, our music culture are. So that's how initially the orchestra started to create in 1950s, and the broadcasting company, the Chinese Broadcasting Bureau, they start to create this orchestra, and that's basically is what we see today. There's a string section, plugging instrument section, wind instrument section, and percussion instrument section, and it's pretty much similar as the Western Symphony Orchestra, except the Western Symphony Orchestra, it doesn't have plugging instrument section, right? So we have this extra section, and they have a woodwind section, brass section, string section, and percussion section. So that is a little about history, how the Chinese orchestra been created. I think JunYi probably have more to say about that.
Yeah, indeed. It's very interesting. One thing is that how it becomes standard, and also like Prof. Chai mentioned, is like pre-1949, which is the new China. Before that, actually, in 1920s, during that time, that's where the Westernization start blossom around the China. And actually, during that time, many there are some scholars as well, music. I would call them the pioneer back then, like for example, Liu Tianhua, and also back in Beijing and Shanghai, they want to expand and the traditional music, standardize or make them even more, how should I put the word? The one issue with the traditional music is like most of them are more orally training. It's not like, it's unlike the Western music, it's like notated music, and also continue also to make it bigger sound as well as standardized. Like Western composition is one also very important thing in this particular Chinese music history, because it's like before 1920s, there isn't many like music that is purposely written for orchestra. That is when, like for example, Liu Tianhua, that he started write music, particularly for erhu. He's what we call the modernization of erhu, the father of modern erhu. He actually write music for erhu, even borrow the Western compositional technique from violin into erhu, something like that. So the compositional history is very important since 1920s. But like what Prof. Chai mentioned here, very important is like the standardization of the four particular instrument groups actually is after 1949.
That's right. And when they create this Chinese orchestra, and they have some problems, because Chinese instruments are mostly high register instruments. They're not really middle range and lower range, right? Instruments like a cello, bass, or viola. There's not such type. So what we're going to face this question in China during 1950s. Musicians start to create this new instruments and expand the existing instrument, like JunYi introduced, like erhu. They start to make a bigger erhu, and the sounds become lower, and so they have to create for an orchestra. They have to have a lower instrument section. So that's how many those new instruments been invented during this process, so like the middle range sheng, low range sheng, and a low range sona, and gehu, all those things. They all is actually created up to 1950s.
And also, it's also important to point out one thing is the philosophy of the ensemble itself. Back in the time, the music itself is not really unlike the Western homophonic music. It's more like heterogeneous, because like, for example, Jiangnan Sizhu 音乐, the way they play the music is just one single melody, and they all improvise based on that melody. they don't really have the sense of harmony, counterpoint. That kind of concept is purely from Western, especially European composition style. So this particular change actually, like after post 1949, composer really start to explore, okay, how are we going to create this symphonic sound of this particular genre? They are exploring. It spent nearly a few decades to really go to where we are right now.
JunYi, I remember you do have a short clip of Jiangnan Sizhu. Can
Right.
we play that?
Sure.
Yeah. Zhiren, can we play that? Thank you. I do thank you both. Here is Liu Tianhua, as well. JunYi mentioned, well, who really did reinvented erhu in a sense. And as I recall from JunYi's presentation, that there's even from the name, there's traditional instrument versus the reinvented instruments that's reflecting the when modern Chinese orchestra is well modeled after the Western orchestra, and some changes has to make. And Zhiren, can you please turn off the presentation?
And also one thing is quickly point out, the purpose of music is very different back then. It's more like entertainment and also like in the neighborhood. But when it comes to the post 1949, this particular Chinese orchestra becomes something like more what we call the concert music setting. So it's with that actually changed the whole direction how the Chinese origin, like the Chinese music, especially for Chinese orchestra, approach to the people.
Indeed. We do have a few questions coming from the audience, which I will get to. But before that, I do want to also ask each of you one more question, because we are talking about the history of modern Chinese orchestra, that Chinese music ensemble tradition went back to, as Jindong mentioned, 2,500 years ago. And as well, we are looking to all the changes, the beginning of modern Chinese orchestra, and looking forward to the future. We are in this cross-cultural crossroads that music back and forth between China and the world. Then we are really talking about internationalization of music. So I want to first start with Jindong, because you are heading the US-China Music Institute, at the Bard College Conservatory of Music, and you're building a program to train Chinese students in Chinese instrument like pipa, guqin, and erhu with an international mind. So what is, in your view, at the core of the international mind for students of Chinese music at your institute?
Yes, thank you for asking the question. And as you can see, even the example JunYi just showed you, and the Chinese instrument or Chinese music for a long time, really, it's been categorized as a folk music, countryside music, or something. It's true. There's a function of that. Although our very 2,500 years ago, those ceremonial music have been get lost. But in today's world, especially in the past 20 years, I think the Chinese instruments or Chinese orchestra has been experiencing rapid development. So that it became more concertized, become more precise, and become more expressive. So the make Chinese instruments not just for folk 红白喜事, it's someone dead or someone get married, you play the sheng, you play the. It's not only in that category. It's really elevated today, become very, very artistic and sophisticated form. And in the early time, 1950s, when people created Chinese orchestra, they do imitating Western orchestras structure. Even the compositional scale. They have a harmony, they have a melody, they have a bass, and so on, like a Beethoven, like that. But in the past 20 years, I think that also has been changing. Many young composers, the new generation of composers start to really study each Chinese instruments and their position and their expressive means. So actually they create a piece more specifically for those instruments. It becomes a different kind of a artistic level, I would say. So that's it's really a big improvement. And the same thing, when the reason we create a Chinese instrument major in Bard Conservatory Music and within the US-China Music Institute, because we following that trend. And when you go to China, go to any of those conservatories today, and Shanghai, Beijing, you see talented pianist students, talented violin students, right? Same time, you see very talented erhu players, very talented pipa players. They're so equally talented and equally expressive. So that's what I feel. And we need to let the world to know those instruments, to know those Chinese music part of that. So that is one of the reasons. So if we create this program in Bard, and then the student can learn those instruments, and then they can start to emerge those instruments into Western music format. But that's only one part of it. And the second part is for the new generation, for the Chinese music developers, we need a new generation of musicians. So those musicians need to have just like Shenzhen said, you have an international mind. You need to have a broader view, and you need to have a very good communication skills. So only that, then you can exchange your ideas, including musical ones, and you can change your compositional ideas, and then between the West and East can be more direct in contact. Yeah, just like 400 years ago, Western music came to China and by the missionaries, and then, but it didn't really develop until 1927, when Xiao Youmei created Shanghai Conservatory of Music. That's the first conservatory in China. Because that conservatory being created that time, then everywhere in China, young people want to learn Western music, came to Shanghai to study Western music. And Li Delun and Han Zhongjie and all those famous first generation Chinese composers actually pretty much start in Shanghai after 1927. And today, it's kind of following the same methods. We create this US-China Music Institute in the West. And hopefully in the future, they will trigger more young people in the West to learn what Chinese music. And for composers around the world, doesn't matter you're Chinese or you're British or you're American, the classical music world, we are all looking for the future of classical music. We have been playing the pieces, most composers are dead, right? And we playing those very wonderful high days, the symphonic high days piece, but same time we need our music of our time. So what is music of our time? The world become combined, become smaller, and become more diverse, and the music it should reflect that. So that's why what we were trying to do, to use this to create this institution, then to create opportunity for the East, West, really join together to start something new.
And for especially the new generation, Jindong, as you mentioned, this is critically important. As you pointed out, the world is becoming smaller and more diverse. but what people need to communicate. And music is one form that really unites people. As also you mentioned, the composer, I think JunYi is one example right here in front of us. And as I just, because I keep looking at the book that you refer to. By the way, this is the book that JunYi is, we're holding in our hands right now, the Teng Guide to the Chinese Orchestra. And it introduces each individual instrument in depth in this book. That's the reason I think why it's so thick.
Last year JunYi, showed me his book. I'm just so excited. I was very excited because those kind of book, it just rare. It almost, if you say there's not exist or very rare. And there's so many Western composers, student composers. They want to compose for Chinese instrument, but they don't know how to do it. So this book like this, and just like many other Chinese harmony book or Chinese folk song tradition book, or it gave people a guide to learn, those instruments function and to start to compose. I think this is really remarkable. JunYi did this book.
Yeah, sure. As a co-author of this book, JunYi, can you, I know we are running short of time, we probably will go over a few minutes if the audience and the speakers allow, but I do want to ask you as the co-author of the book, what's your view, or how would you like to see Chinese music in an international context?
The one thing I want to add on top of what Prof. Chai just mentioned is the one thing very important is that this whole scenario is becoming more and more professional, which actually important, especially in the international level, where we have Chinese orchestra, professional Chinese orchestra, as well as music ensembles across China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, Singapore, Australia, as well as US and Canada. This is a very important thing because all of these Chinese professional, it gives opportunity, especially for composers, to have a chance to try something, to experiment their ideas at a very high level. But at the same time, it is also important continuously to open mind, because both traditional, even though the Chinese instruments, they are learning from the West, but some Western compositional idea cannot just put on top of the Chinese instruments directly. You still need to understand their own language. And then you find a common ground and add the value and find the new value that represent yourself, that you absorb from both culture. That is the future. I think it's very important. You need to find a common ground and then learn from each other, help each other, and create the new value from there. And that will break the boundary from times to times.
That's right.
I do want to raise a few questions from the audience. The first one from Marilyn Glinstein. Well, this is more referring to JunYi's presentation for Ruan and Gu Zheng. Wasn't the drunkard piece originally composed for Gu Qin?
Yes, correct. That is actually one particular what we call the traditional repertoire in Chinese music history. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Yuhua Mao. I think, well, both of you can respond to this. Is there an effort to systematically collect all musical instruments that appear in the historical documents, archaeologically unearthed ones? For example, a flute made of bird's bone about 8,000 years ago, and study the characteristics of each of them, improve them, and compose new music and arrange old ones for them.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. And so there's like the bone flute created thousands of years ago. We don't know. We know we can produce sound, produce certain notes, but we don't know the pieces because there's nothing really can show the notation, right? One of the things in Chinese music is notation is very different than the Western instruments. So Western instrument notation, it doesn't matter if a 5-line or the earlier one's a 4-line or 3-line, you do see the higher notes, it's a higher in the position, lower notes in lower position. And the Chinese instrument really developed this very, very late. And the early time, basically the instrument teaching is go through person by person. And it not really goes to the notation. And then later on, it's create some kind of a notation, but the notations, it's not very systematic, what I call the world, right? And the earlier notation, we know there's like a guqin has its own notation, and there's some other instrument, pipa has its own notation. But the guqin notation, for example, is created by Chinese words. And those words actually is not really Chinese words. It's one word and combine many different words, like to use which finger to plug which string, use what kind of a technique. So that's all in one word. Yeah, and then there's no rhythm. So those, it's very interesting. So and to answer your question, in the conservatory today in China, one of the very what do you call research, the very important research is to decode those code, decode those notations. And I think I have left like 3,000 those kind of a notation pieces, but we only can denote now we have 30 or 40 of them. So that is one way you can see, and it's very difficult to do. As I mentioned, the guqin, right? You have that notation to say which finger play what kind of string, but that's only part of it because you don't really know how the guqin was tuned. So if the guqin tuned in the south will be different tuning system than the north, and sometimes different than each player. So if you don't know the tuning system, even you put your finger on that place, use the same technique, it's not necessary it's the notes are going to produce as the composers want. So there's a lot of different kind of tasks you have to face to really do this. And I think we are keep doing that. And I even, like one of my American friend, he said, I found a new method to decode this guqin repertoire, but it's only can go the limit on the limited, very limited the steps. But little by little, we'll find more ancient pieces, and then we will put into a kind of a modern notation, and people can share them.
We are running out of time, and I apologize. We cannot go through all the questions in the Q&A, but we appreciate your questions and comments. I do want to close the program with one question to both of our speakers, as well we experienced this week or even in coming months in the US, an increasing split of a union. What's your view? We already touched upon this, but perhaps in 1 or 2 sentences, you can summarize this. What's your view as a musician working across different cultures and cross-cultural exchanges? And I will first start with JunYi.
The one most important thing is that the world, human history itself, and where I come from, Malaysia itself is already multicultural. Hybrid is already the setting of the hybrid is already the cross-cultural. So it is what I think. What is more important is like really understand the root of each of them, and continue to see how to move forward to really. It's like I just feel like the world is so big. There are many things very unique by themselves, but at the same time, when you meet each other, you will see something different and similarities. Learn from each other and continue to grow.
Thank you, JunYi. And now, Jindong, 1 or 2 sentences.
I grown up being trained as a Western musician. I'm conducting symphony orchestra, Western opera, so on. When I, through my career and conduct all over the places, especially in the West, in America, if I go to somewhere, I meet audience, and the audience question always asks me, what about you conduct Western pieces, Beethoven or something? What about the Chinese instrument? What about Chinese music? So that make me think about it more. Because that's why lately I involved with the development of the Chinese music part, because I think for any culture, for any art forms, if it has been exist for hundreds or even 1,000 years, it must have its cultural value, its artistic value. So my advice will be, don't discriminate any kind of culture, don't discriminate any kind of music. And the music exists for a reason, and people need music. You live in different culture, you experience different music. And then now music becomes so universal, actually we should share this kind of different music together. So that will make a world to be a better place.
More colorful, continue to be more colorful.
Thank you both for sharing your thoughts and knowledge of music here today. And especially tonight. Thanks to all the audience who joined us. Before we end today's program, I would ask Zhiren, can you please put the last PowerPoint with the Teng Guide, the book, to share the screen. And also I would want to mention a few upcoming programs at China Institute. On November 17th, we have a program about food, a taste of China, from farm to table in Zhejiang province. And our blockbuster program this season, celebrating the 600th anniversary for the Forbidden City, will have a family workshop tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time, 10 o'clock. And on December 2nd, we will have a program discussing the private life of Qianlong Emperor by two distinguished professors from Harvard University and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I would invite you to go to our website for more information. Please sign up our e-newsletter to stay connected, or join us as a member. The link is in the chat box. So that we can bring programs like this for free or at very low cost. For those who want to dig deeper to Chinese music, language, and culture, our School of Chinese Studies offers many courses to advance your understandings and skills. And last but not least, for teachers who plan to join our pedagogical discussion on November 13th, we are having the link posted in the chat box. It's already there. Please click through for registration. We will also include this link in our follow-up emails to you. Again, thanks to our two speakers, JunYi and Jindong, for your brilliant presentation and discussion. And all of you, wish you enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and have a good weekend. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you again, Sun Zhan.
Thank you.